Right now, artificial intelligence is highly uneven. A system might easily win an international math Olympiad, but it still struggles to reliably perform a physical task like folding laundry. But the underlying engines driving this technology are scaling rapidly. This animated chart shows the growth of training compute, data, and algorithmic efficiency compounding simultaneously. If these empirical trends hold, researchers project the industry could plausibly reach artificial general intelligence, or AGI, between 2030 and 2040. We define AGI as systems that can match or exceed human performance at most economically useful cognitive work. Achieving that level of automation would rapidly accelerate scientific discovery, multiply economic output, and introduce entirely new classes of military weapons. The United States and China understand these stakes. Both governments are treating AGI development as a strict, zero-sum national security imperative. They are backing their domestic industries with billions in state funding and deploying severe export controls to choke off foreign competitors. This superpower sprint puts every other region, Europe, India, the Middle East, in a highly vulnerable position. If they fail to act, they will be entirely boxed out of the foundation of the future economy. Without the ability to train their own frontier models, these nations risk becoming AI takers, forced to rent access to cognitive labor from foreign corporations. Relying entirely on external systems for core economic and military functions means those outside powers can dictate terms, restrict access, or cut off the supply entirely, stripping the renting nation of its sovereign agency. Escaping that dependency isn't simply a matter of writing better code. The leaders are protected by a massive concentration of resources known as the AI Triad. This bar chart breaks down global AI computing capacity. The disparity is stark. The US holds roughly 75% of global compute, while Europe hosts barely 5%. That capacity relies on highly specialized hardware like this, and Washington tightly controls which nations and companies are allowed to purchase it. On top of the hardware, training these models now requires draining massive energy grids and securing tens of billions of dollars in venture capital. The physical barriers to entry are so high that middle powers simply do not have the raw materials to compete head-to-head in foundational model training. Inside these middle power governments, the strategic response is lagging. Many lack the internal expertise to accurately track where the frontier of the technology even is. Because they don't host the leading research labs, policymakers often have to rely on the foreign companies building the tech to tell them what the risks actually are. And while Beijing coordinates top-down directives and Washington issues rapid executive orders, institutions like the European Union rely on slow, multi-state consensus. That bureaucratic friction leaves them exposed to immediate shocks, like sudden automated cyber attacks or rapid labor market disruptions. The math is clear. Without aggressive policy intervention, the compounding returns of AGI will pool almost entirely within the borders of the nations that created it. To survive this transition, middle powers must immediately treat this as a paramount national security crisis by commissioning rigorous AGI preparedness plans. The central strategy for these nations must be asymmetric leverage, identifying their localized monopolies and using them to negotiate access to the frontier. Take Europe. They might not build the top models, but a single Dutch company holds a global monopoly on the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines required to print the chips that train the models. Meanwhile, nations like the UAE are bypassing the research phase entirely, using massive sovereign wealth and domestic energy reserves to buy lucrative stakes directly into U.S. computing infrastructure. These nations aren't helpless. They control specific, hard-to-replace physical and financial assets that the leading powers desperately need to maintain their sprint. The final piece of leverage is collective diplomacy. Bridge powers can pool their resources to form a unified negotiating bloc. The UK and Singapore are already making aggressive moves in this space, establishing state-backed institutes to act as global arbiters for AI safety testing. By aligning their standards and acting together, they can force the duopoly to the negotiating table instead of accepting unilateral terms. The arrival of AGI will physically divide the global economy between those who control the intelligence and those who consume it. For every nation outside the leading labs, survival requires identifying their leverage, uniting their resources, and trading them for sovereign access before the door locks from the inside.